The clink of crystal glasses carried through the room as Marcus, one of Alden's colleagues, raised his goblet in a toast. The table glittered under pendant lights, every detail curated to show off Keziah's taste for cold perfection. White marble counters gleamed behind her. Abstract paintings loomed from the walls, and I sat tucked into a corner seat, careful not to let my elbows touch her polished table. The laughter swelled, but my own plate of roasted halibut had gone mostly untouched. It was a meal I never would have cooked too ornate, too expensive for an ordinary Saturday night. My daughter-in-law swept past me, leaning close to refill a guest's wine, and in that calculated motion, her arm brushed my plate. I watched, almost in slow motion, as it slid, tipped, and crashed against the hardwood floor, fish and sauce spreading like a stain of humiliation. "Oh no," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Then, louder. "For everyone to hear if you want dinner. Lick it off the floor." The room fell quiet. A couple of Alden's colleagues shifted in their seats. My son's face reddened, but his lips pressed shut. As if silence could erase the cruelty, I steadied myself against the table, hands trembling for just a breath. Then I stood. I smoothed the sleeve of my coat, straightened the hem, and leaned close enough for her perfume to sting my nose. "I know everything," I whispered. For a moment, Keziah's smirk faltered. Her eyes darted to my phone, which I now held at my side. I tilted the screen just enough for her to glimpse the paused recording, her own voice, grainy but unmistakable, muttering about listing the cottage once we secure her signature. Color drained from her cheeks. The guests looked on in confusion, unsure if this was some family quarrel or part of the entertainment. Alden's hand twitched as though he might intervene, but he didn't move. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, gathered my purse, and walked toward the door without another word. The murmur of conversation began to swell again behind me, brittle and uneasy, but I kept moving. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and briny with the faint scent of the harbor. My shoes clicked against the stone walkway as I made my way to the car, each step steady, certain I had endured their sneers long enough. Now it was my turn to speak, and the first page of my red folder was waiting. Driving home from that dinner, I didn't bother turning on the radio. Silence was my company, and in that silence, old ghosts stirred. I had spent most of my life keeping order where there was none, balancing books that never quite added up, making pennies stretch into dollars. For 30 years, I served as bursar at the local high school, trusted with ledgers, receipts, and tuition records that others found tedious but I found almost comforting. Numbers never lied, even when people did. When my husband, Malcolm, grew sick and passed before 50, it was those ledgers that kept me upright. Alden was still a teenager then, raw with grief and angry at the world. I picked up extra shifts, denied myself small comforts, and scraped enough together so he could finish trade school without debt. My reward was watching him take his first contract jobs, his shoulders set with pride that mirrored his father's. I never bought fine china or cruises. Instead, I invested in the little cedar-shingled cottage at Bracken Harbor. To others it looked modest, but to me it was safety. The first night I unlocked its door, I promised myself no one would ever be able to take it from me. Years later, I honored that promise by placing it in a revocable trust, sealed with my own careful handwriting and signatures that could withstand any court. Still, documents cannot defend against loneliness. When Alden married Keziah, I hoped for warmth, but what I found was distance. My voice in his life grew softer, drowned out by her sharper tones and her relentless plans. I became a guest in their home, tolerated more than welcomed. That was why I began the red folder. Every deed, every account statement, every notarized copy went into it, a lifetime of discipline tucked behind a simple clasp. Resting in the locked drawer of my desk, it was more than a habit. It was my defense, my shield against the creeping feeling that one day, someone would try to erase me. And not long after that dinner, the first signs of tampering began to appear. The first warning came in something as small as an envelope. I found it resting on my hallway table, the flap clumsily taped back down. The kind of job that only looks right from a distance. Inside was a bank statement. Nothing alarming at first glance, but the knowledge that someone else had touched it chilled me more than the numbers ever could. A few days later, while dropping off a pair of sweaters for Alden, I noticed a stack of glossy realtor brochures shoved beneath his work boots by the back door. They showed cheerful coastal homes with vaulted ceilings and sweeping lawns, all far removed from the quiet dignity of my Bracken Harbor cottage. I felt my stomach tighten. The worst moment came one evening when I lingered longer than usual at their house. The laughter from upstairs drifted down through the old heating vent, carrying words I wasn't meant to hear. Keziah's voice. Smooth as silk, but hard as glass. Once we have her signature, the cottage is gone. It'll wipe the debts clean. I stood frozen. Every syllable slicing through me. The her was me. My cottage, the place I had built from grief into sanctuary, was reduced to nothing more than a line item on her balance sheet. Later that night, I opened the red folder again, hands steadier than I expected, among the copies I'd kept. One stood out an incorporation document for something called Vale and Keene Holdings. My name wasn't there. But Alden's was his co-signature curling across the page in strokes too clean, too deliberate. My son's handwriting had never looked like that. When I confronted him the next morning, his eyes darted away. He was pale, his shoulders sagging, and exhaustion hung on him like an extra weight. Keziah handles all the paperwork. He muttered, I just sign when she says. But even as he spoke, he refused to meet my gaze. I left their house with the document pressed tight in my bag, knowing the truth. Alden was caught, whether by debt, by fear, or by love. And if I didn't act soon, the cottage and everything it symbolized would be lost. The morning after discovering Alden's forged name, I placed the red folder into my tote bag and took the bus into the city. My hands rested on the leather clasp the whole ride, as though the folder itself might leap away if I didn't keep hold. I had an appointment with Quentin Arledge, a lawyer who specialized in elder law and financial protections. His office sat above a row of shops, modest but orderly, with bookshelves that smelled faintly of cedar. I laid the folder on his desk and began to explain. Each page turned with careful precision bank statements, photocopies, the incorporation of Vale and Keene Holdings with Alden's forged signature. Quentin's brow furrowed deeper with every sheet. This, he said at last, tapping the LLC papers, fits the classic markers of elder financial exploitation. Tampered mail, pressure for signatures, shell companies to funnel assets. It's a textbook case. Ms. Keene, his words steadied me. I wasn't imagining shadows. There was a pattern, a plan. Quentin leaned back. I want you to meet someone Dorian Pike, retired police detective. He's handled investigations like this before. If Keziah's running something, he'll know how to trace it. Dorian arrived that same afternoon, tall, gray-haired, with a quiet way of speaking that made me think of steady rivers. He took the papers without judgment, scanned them, and promised to follow the trail. I'll be discreet. He said, You'll know what I know as soon as I find it, within a week. His report landed back in my hands. The LLC was active, with transactions already moving through it. Some payments linked directly to accounts I recognized as Alden's, others to Keziah's private card. Even my own bank correspondence showed signs of tampering. That was when I turned to Helena Stroud, the branch manager I'd known for years. She didn't flinch when I told her what was happening. "We'll freeze suspicious activity right now," she said, her fingers already moving across the keyboard. "And we'll set stricter controls. No one touches your accounts without you," I exhaled. The first true breath in days, though I knew protection on paper was only the beginning. Maeve Rook had lived across the lane from me for 20 years, long enough to know when something was off. She noticed the way I lingered at my mailbox, the way I carried my tote closer to my chest. One evening over tea, I finally told her the truth. She didn't gasp or flutter. She simply nodded and said, "Then let's make sure you're not fighting blind." Together we devised a plan. From her nephew's hardware shop, she borrowed a tiny camera, no bigger than a thumb. I tied a thin red ribbon around the cord of my reading lamp, disguising the lens as if the ribbon were only a sentimental flourish. It faced the spot where Keziah always perched when she visited, cross-legged and smug, sipping tea she never thanked me for. It didn't take long. On her next visit, Keziah's voice dripped with disdain as she inspected my kitchen. "You shouldn't be cooking this much. Sibylla, it isn't healthy at your age. Alden and I can bring meals. If you'd just sign the papers." She tapped the folder she carried. Power of attorney. She called it a convenience, but her smile told another story. Later, the footage showed her leaning close to Alden, coaching him. "Tell her it's for emergencies. Say you're worried about her falling. She'll give in if it sounds like you're protecting her." My son's eyes were tired, his shoulders heavy, but he nodded. The real shock came past midnight. The camera's microphone picked up her voice again, softer this time, almost purring. "You'll have it soon," she said into her phone. "Once the cottage is ours, we can finally make moves." A man's voice answered faintly, low and confident, though I couldn't catch the words. Keziah laughed a laugh I hadn't heard in years, bright and young, reserved for someone who wasn't my son. I watched the recording twice, bile rising in my throat. Keziah wasn't just exploiting Alden's weakness. She was conspiring with someone else, someone she trusted more than her own husband. And now, I needed to know who. The second invitation arrived with the same sugar-dipped tone as the first, "Mother, Marcus from the firm insists you join us again, 7 o'clock sharp." I accepted without hesitation this time, but not for civility. I wanted to watch Keziah's performance collapse. The table was dressed just as before, gleaming glassware, dishes plated as if for a magazine spread. Keziah moved like the hostess she fancied herself, pouring wine with a practiced hand. Yet when her eyes brushed mine, I saw the flicker of unease, the ghost of our last encounter. Dinner began with her carefully scripted stories. She mocked my old-fashioned record-keeping, eliciting a hollow laugh from one of Alden's colleagues. Then, as dessert plates were served, she leaned close, voice dripping. "Still keeping that little cottage of yours, Sibylla. Seems a shame. All that space for one person." I set down my fork and adjusted my coat. Her grin widened, hungry for another scene. I gave it to her. "I know everything," I whispered, at that moment. Her phone buzzed against the table. She glanced down, expecting some congratulatory text, but her face blanched. I knew what she saw: Helena's alerts, accounts frozen, transactions denied. Silence rippled outward. Forks paused. Alden looked from her to me, confusion shading into dread. I let the moment breathe, then spoke softly. "For him more than her. Your wife has been busy buying more than groceries." Gasps stirred around the table. Keziah tried to recover, lips parting in protest, but no sound emerged. Alden's hands tightened around his glass as if he feared it might shatter. I rose, slipping my chair neatly under the table. "Thank you for the meal," I said, and walked toward the door, behind me. The air buzzed with nervous whispers, but no one dared call me back. The night air felt different, this time not briny, but charged. Keziah's mask had cracked, and I had left her to bleed silence in front of her chosen audience. The next morning would bring retaliation, I was certain, and I needed to be ready. By dawn, the following morning, the machinery was already in motion. Quentin called from his office, his voice clipped but steady. "The petition's filed. Any attempt to transfer property or alter your estate without consent is now frozen by injunction." He paused, as if measuring the weight of what he'd just said. "You're shielded for now." "Sibylla, but this isn't over," Helena rang next, confirming she had locked down my accounts. "No withdrawals beyond your signature. I've flagged every line of credit in your name. If they so much as breathe near your savings, I'll know." Relief came like a sip of water in a drought, but it didn't quench the deeper thirst for safety. By noon, Dorian arrived at my door with a thin folder. Inside was the timeline dates, receipts, recordings all stitched together like a net. Every late-night charge, every suspicious payment traced back to Vale and Keene Holdings. He tapped the final page. This could hold in court, but people cornered like this, they don't go quiet. Expect noise. I didn't wait long. That evening, my mail slot clattered. Among the usual bills was a plain envelope, unmarked, sealed with cheap glue. Inside, on a single sheet, block letters sprawled in thick black ink. "Stay quiet. Old woman, or the trust won't save you." The words pulsed in my hands. Keziah wasn't clever enough to hide her malice so crudely. This felt different, as if another set of hands had joined hers. The man from the phone call, perhaps, whoever it was. They wanted me afraid. I folded the paper neatly and slid it into the red folder. Fear had no place on my kitchen table. But later, as I made tea, I caught myself glancing at the windows, half expecting a shadow. The knock at my door made me flinch. Alden stood there, drawn and restless. "Mother, what are you doing? Keziah says you're inventing stories, trying to break us apart." His voice trembled, part accusation, part plea. I opened the folder and laid down the forged signature beside the bank transfers. His face collapsed as the truth sank in. He pressed his hands to his temples, whispering, "What has she done?" And I knew then the fight was only beginning. The conference room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee grounds. I sat at one end of the table, Quentin beside me, the red folder resting between us like a quiet weapon. Across from me, Keziah adjusted her blazer with the precision of a stage actress, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Alden sat next to her, shoulders bowed, eyes hollow. The mediator called us to order, outlining the purpose of the meeting, but Keziah interrupted almost instantly. "This is absurd. My mother-in-law has been misled. She's elderly, confused. She doesn't understand what she's signing." I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into the folder and slid the red USB across the table. Quentin plugged it into the projector. The screen flickered to life with footage from my lamp. There was Keziah, sitting in my kitchen, her voice recorded in crisp detail. "Tell her it's for emergencies. Say you're worried she'll fall. She'll give in if it sounds protective." Gasps broke the silence. Alden's head snapped toward her, his lips parting as though he'd been struck. The video rolled on. Midnight whispers, a man's muffled voice through the phone, her laugh, girlish, conspiratorial. Then the papers appeared: LLC filings, forged co-signatures, bank statements linked to joint accounts. Quentin laid each document flat on the table. One by one, like cards in a rigged game, finally revealed Iris Delafield, the social worker, leaned forward. Mrs. Keene, these are clear indicators of elder abuse and financial fraud. Combined with the video, this constitutes conspiracy. Courts do not look kindly on patterns like this. Keziah's composure cracked. This is taken out of context, she began. But her voice trembled. Alden's gaze no longer wavered. He stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. The mediator cleared his throat. And this man. He gestured to the grainy image of the midnight call. Quentin answered. A realtor-investor. Already withdrawing his involvement since this surfaced. The color drained from Keziah's face. Her ally had abandoned her, leaving her exposed. She reached for Alden's arm, but he pulled back. Eyes clouded with betrayal. I folded my hands in my lap. Steady at last. What broke wasn't just her mask, it was the fragile web she'd spun around my son. And the choice before him had finally come into view. Weeks later, the sea became my constant companion again. The Bracken Harbor cottage, weathered by storms yet standing proud, welcomed me back with its familiar cedar scent and the steady lull of waves against the rocks. I opened every window, letting the salt air sweep through, carrying away the remnants of courthouse whispers and family shame. It was here, in this small house, that I began again. The library in town offered me a corner room on Tuesday afternoons, and I called it the Clear Ledger Circle. A handful of seniors gathered each week, notebooks in hand, eager to learn how to shield their accounts, spot-forged signatures, and guard their names against hungry hands. I showed them how to create folders like mine, read and orderly, with nothing left to chance. What had once been my private armor became a gift I could pass forward. Alden came one Sunday. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared at the gate, shoulders stooped, holding a bag of groceries like a peace offering. His voice was low when he said, "I should have protected you. Mother, I let her speak for me. I let her speak for us." He placed an envelope on the table. Repayment, a beginning of restitution. I didn't open it. I listened. I let him speak until the words ran dry. But forgiveness is not a signature on a check. It is a journey. And I was not yet ready to walk it. I told him so, gently but firmly. He nodded, eyes glistening, and left the envelope where it lay. That evening, I set a single plate at my sunny table, the light slanting gold through the window, and I served myself with steady hands. I took a bite, closed my eyes, and whispered into the quiet, "Respect is the only seasoning I require."